The morning air was crisp, with a faint chill that hinted at the coming autumn.
Max's golden fur shimmered under the rising sun as he stood beside his owner, Henry, at the small train station.
His tail swayed slowly, his eyes fixed on Henry, as if sensing that today was different. The familiar routine they had shared every day was now interrupted by the sight of Henry's worn backpack and the somber look in his eyes. This wasn't a morning walk or one of their usual adventures, this was a goodbye.
Henry crouched down to Max's level, his hand resting on the dog's head, fingers sinking into the thick fur that had been his comfort on so many lonely nights.
"I'll be back soon, boy," Henry whispered, his voice soft and full of unspoken promises.
Max's ears perked up, his tail giving a hopeful wag.
But even as Henry spoke, there was something in the way he lingered, the way his hand trembled slightly, that made Max hesitate. He nudged Henry's hand with his nose, trying to understand, to reassure, but the unease in Henry's eyes remained. Max watched as Henry rose and walked towards the train, the heavy door sliding open with a metallic groan. Max's body tensed, every muscle ready to follow, to leap onto the train and be by his side. But something in Henry's final look stopped him. A quiet command passed between them, a request for patience, for trust. So Max sat down, his eyes tracking Henry's every step, his heart beating faster as Henry disappeared inside the train. The train's whistle blew, echoing through the quiet station, and Max's ears flattened against his head. The sound felt final, like the closing of a chapter he wasn't ready to end. His eyes remained fixed on the departing train, his body still, waiting, as if willing it to turn around and bring Henry back to him. But the train continued forward, shrinking into the distance until it was nothing more than a blur on the horizon. Max didn't move. As the minutes stretched into hours, the small town began to stir to life. People passed by, some giving Max a curious glance, others offering a kind word. But Max remained at his post, his eyes on the tracks, waiting. The station master, a kind old man with a weathered face, approached him, tossing a small biscuit in his direction. "He'll be back soon enough," the man said, his voice gruff but gentle. Max barely blinked, his focus unwavering. He ignored the biscuit, ignored the strangers passing by. His world was reduced to that single spot on the platform where Henry had left. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the empty platform. The station was quieter now, the last of the trains for the day long gone, but Max didn't move. He lay down, resting his head on his paws, his gaze never leaving the direction Henry had disappeared. Later that evening, as the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Lily, the young woman who ran the bakery down the street, passed by the station on her way home. She spotted Max lying on the platform, his golden coat blending with the fading light. Her steps slowed, and she hesitated for a moment before approaching. "Hey there, Max," she said softly, kneeling beside him. Max's eyes flickered towards her briefly, but his attention quickly returned to the tracks. "You're waiting for Henry, huh?" She continued, her hand reaching out to stroke his head. Max didn't move. Lily smiled sadly, understanding in her eyes. "He'll come back," she whispered, though her own voice carried the weight of doubt. She stood, giving Max one last pat before heading home, her heart heavy with the sight of such unwavering devotion. Days turned into weeks. Max's routine never changed. Every morning, he would rise as the sun did, take his place at the station, and wait. The townspeople grew accustomed to his presence. Some would stop by to check on him, offering him food or a gentle word, but Max remained indifferent. His only focus was the trains, each one carrying the hope that Henry would step off, just as he had promised. Tom, The town elder often sat near the station, watching Max with quiet admiration.
He had lived in the town for decades, had seen people come and go, but there was something about Max's loyalty that touched him deeply.
"You're waiting for a ghost, aren't you, Max?" Tom murmured one afternoon as Max lay by his side. The dog didn't acknowledge him, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon. Tom sighed, his old bones creaking as he stood.
Life doesn't always turn out the way we plan.
As the days stretched into weeks and the weeks into months, the seasons began to change.
The warmth of late summer gave way to the cool winds of autumn, and still Max waited. His once glossy coat grew dull, his body thinner from the long days spent lying in the dirt. But his spirit never wavered.
One evening, as the last train of the day pulled into the station, Max's ears perked up. His body became alert, his tail wagging for the first time in days. The station master, who had grown used to Max's routine, watched with bated breath.
Could it be Henry? Could this be the moment?
The passengers disembarked, their faces tired from their journeys, but none of them were Henry.
Max's tail slowed, then stopped.
He lay back down with a soft sigh, his eyes once again fixed on the tracks. The station master approached him, crouching down to his level. "It wasn't him this time, buddy," he said quietly, "but you keep waiting."
He'll come.
And so, Max continued to wait.
Through rain and wind, through the changing of seasons, Max remained at his post, his faith unshaken.
And the people of the town, who had once watched him with curiosity, began to watch with something deeper a sense of reverence, of awe at the power of such simple, unwavering love. Time passed slowly in the small town, and as the days turned into weeks, Max's wait became part of the town's daily rhythm. The summer warmth began to fade, and the crisp chill of autumn settled in, painting the leaves in hues of gold and orange. Max remained steadfast, his fur catching dust and dirt from the station floor as he waited for Henry. Each morning, he took his place at the train station, his eyes fixed on the tracks, his heart full of hope.
The townspeople started to notice his unwavering presence, and whispers of Henry's absence began to ripple through the community.
Lily grew closer to Max during these weeks. Her visits to the station became more frequent, and she would often sit with him, bringing a small bowl of warm broth.
Max would nudge her hand gently in acknowledgement, but his attention never left the tracks. His loyalty tugged at Lily's heartstrings, and although she found herself deeply invested in his wait, a growing worry gnawed at her. Each day, she would murmur soft words of reassurance to Max, hoping to convince herself as much as him. "Henry will be back soon, Max. You just wait a little longer." But as time wore on, the town's patience began to waver. Rumors about Henry's fate circulated among the townspeople. Some speculated that Henry had started a new life abroad, forgetting about the loyal dog that awaited his return. Others whispered darker possibilities, suggesting that something terrible had happened to him. Max, oblivious to the gossip, remained vigilant, his faith unshaken.
The whispers grew louder as weeks passed, casting a shadow over the hope that had once filled the town. Tom, the elderly man who often watched Max from a distance, had seen enough of life to understand its unpredictable nature. One evening, he approached Max as the sun began to dip behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the platform. Tom sat beside Max, his old bones creaking as he lowered himself onto the bench. He looked out at the fading light, his mind filled with thoughts of the past.
"You're a good dog, Max," Tom said softly, his voice tinged with a sadness that came from years of experience.
"But sometimes the ones we wait for don't come back."
Max didn't respond, his eyes still focused on the tracks,
his body tense as if ready to leap up at the first sight of Henry.
Tom sighed, resting his hands on his knees.
Life doesn't always turn out the way we planned, boy.
Tom's words lingered in the air long after he had gone, but Max's loyalty never wavered.
The people of the town, however, began to question their own hopes.
Conversations about Henry's return became less frequent, and the optimism that once surrounded Max's vigil slowly began to fade.
Then, one day, a glimmer of hope appeared. A train pulled into the station just as the sun was setting, and for the first time in days, Max's ears perked up. His body tensed, his tail wagging furiously as he stood on all fours, alert and expectant.
The station master watched with bated breath, half expecting to see Henry step off the train.
Passengers disembarked, their faces tired from their journeys, but none of them were Henry. Max's tail slowed, then stopped, and his body slumped back to the ground with a defeated sigh.
The station master approached, crouching beside Max and giving him a gentle pat on the head. "Not this time, buddy," he said quietly, "but you keep waiting.
He'll come." Max's moment of excitement was short-lived, but it stirred something in the townspeople. They began to pay more attention to Max's wait once again, and whispers of hope resurfaced. Children who had grown accustomed to seeing Max at the station asked their parents about Henry, wondering when he would return. Older residents, like Tom, remained skeptical, but the younger generation held on to the belief that if Max could wait, so could they.
As the town became more involved in Max's vigil, his story began to spread.
Travelers passing through the town would stop to see the faithful dog, and some even left small gifts or food for him. Max, however, remained indifferent to the attention, his focus always on the tracks.
To him, nothing mattered except the moment when Henry would step off the train and they would be reunited.
Lily's connection to Max deepened with each passing day.
She could see the toll the weight was taking on him. His once shiny coat had grown dull, and his movements were slower, more labored.
The thought of him waiting in vain weighed heavily on her heart, and she found herself spending more time at the station, bringing blankets and extra food to make sure Max was cared for. Yet, despite her growing concern, she couldn't help but admire his unwavering loyalty. "How long will you wait, Max?"
she whispered one evening as she sat beside him. The question lingered in the air, unanswered, as Max lay with his head resting on his paws, his eyes fixed on the distance. Lily sighed, stroking his fur gently. "I hope it's not too long."
The town square became a gathering place for discussions about Max and Henry. Some of the older residents, like Tom, reminisced about the early days when Henry had first adopted Max, recalling the bond the two had shared. Others speculated about Henry's fate, fueling the town's curiosity and concern.
As the days passed, more and more people became emotionally invested in Max's wait, and the once quiet town buzzed with the quiet tension of uncertainty.
Despite the growing doubts, Max's presence at the station had become a symbol of hope for many.
His wait was no longer just about Henry, it had become something larger, something that touched the hearts of everyone who saw him.
The townspeople rallied around Max's story, their emotions intertwined with his unyielding faith.
But as night fell and the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the platform, the weight of the uncertainty began to grow heavier. Lily stood at the window of her bakery, watching Max curl up in his usual spot by the station.
Her brow furrowed with concern, and a quiet question lingered in her mind. How long can he keep waiting?
And how long until we know the truth?
As the night deepened, Max remained where he had always been, loyal, patient, and full of hope.
As time continued to pass, Max's presence at the station became more than just a fixture. It became a story that the entire town embraced.
The people were no longer just curious onlookers. Max's vigil had stirred something deeper within them, a reflection of their own hopes and doubts.
The small town buzzed with conversations about the loyal dog who refused to leave his post, and soon, the tale of Max waiting for Henry spread beyond the town's borders. Travelers and visitors passing through the station heard about Max's story and began stopping by to catch a glimpse of the faithful golden retriever. With each passing day, more people gathered at the station, some leaving small tokens of affection, blankets to keep Max warm, treats, and even toys.
Despite the growing attention, Max remained indifferent to it all.
He accepted the food and water offered by kind strangers, but his focus never wavered from the direction of the trains. For Max, the crowd, the whispers, and the gifts were insignificant. His purpose was clear: he was waiting for Henry, and until Henry returned, nothing else mattered. Lily watched the growing spectacle with a mixture of pride and concern.
She was glad that Max was receiving the care he needed, but a part of her worried that the attention would distract from the real issue. Henry was still gone, and no amount of visitors could fill that void for Max.
Each time a new train pulled into the station, Max's ears would perk up, his body tense with anticipation, only to slump back down when Henry did not appear. It broke Lily's heart to watch him experience that same disappointment over and over again.
One particularly cold morning, as the leaves began to fall from the trees in earnest, Lily arrived at the station with a warm blanket and some fresh bread from her bakery. She placed the blanket gently over Max, patting his side as she sat down beside him. "The town's getting pretty invested in your story, Max," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. "You've become our little hero." Max's tail thumped softly against the wooden platform, acknowledging her presence, but his eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Lily smiled, though sadness lingered in her gaze. "I just hope it's not too long now," she whispered, more to herself than to Max.
Across the town, in the square, Tom sat on his usual bench, watching the townspeople go about their business.
His mind wandered back to earlier days, to the time when Henry and Max were inseparable.
They had always been the picture of loyalty, Henry with his quick smile and adventurous spirit, and Max, the faithful companion by his side.
It pained Tom to see how time had worn down the once hopeful dog.
Max's eyes, though still full of determination, had lost some of their sparkle, and his body moved more slowly than it had before. Age was catching up to him, and Tom wondered how much longer Max could hold on.
One afternoon, a group of children playing near the station caught sight of Max. They ran over, calling his name and trying to get him to play with them, tossing a ball in his direction. Max, however, didn't budge. He gave the children a brief glance before turning his attention back to the tracks.
The children's laughter faded as they realized Max wasn't interested. One of the older boys turned to the others and said, "He's waiting for someone. He doesn't have time to play."
The children ran off, leaving Max in his quiet vigil. From his spot in the square, Tom watched the scene unfold. A deep sigh escaped him as he stood up, his joints stiff from the cold. "Still waiting, old friend?"
he muttered to himself, his heart heavy with understanding.
He had been young once too, full of hope and expectation, but life had taught him that waiting didn't always bring the results you wanted. As the weeks passed and autumn began to turn into winter, the town grew more and more attached to Max's story. It became a common topic of conversation at the local shops and cafes. Visitors came from neighboring towns to see the dog who wouldn't give up, and the station became a small tourist attraction. But for the townspeople who had known Max and Henry for years, the story was personal. One evening, as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, the station was unusually quiet.
Most of the travellers had already gone home, and the streets were growing dark. Max lay on the platform, his coat dusted with snow, his eyes half closed but still alert.
Lily approached him, her arms full of blankets and food, her breath visible in the cold air. She knelt beside him, brushing the snow from his fur. "You've got the whole town wrapped around your paw, Max," she said with a soft laugh. "Everyone's rooting for you."
She unwrapped the blankets, placing them carefully over his body.
"We all believe he's coming back. At least, we want to believe." Max gave a soft whine, shifting slightly to make room for the new blankets.
His eyes met Lily's for a moment, and she could see the weariness in them.
Her heart clenched at the sight. "But how much longer can you wait?"
She whispered, her voice filled with the same doubt that had been creeping into her mind for weeks.
As Lily left the station that night, she turned back one last time to look at Max.
The snow was falling harder now, covering the platform and the tracks in a thin layer of white.
Max, however, remained unmoved, his body curled up against the cold, his eyes still watching, waiting. Lily's chest tightened as she walked away, knowing that Max would be there again the next morning, and the morning after that, until Henry finally returned, or until Max could wait no more. The town square was eerily quiet that night, the only sound being the faint whistle of the wind as it blew through the empty streets.
Tom, standing by his window, watched the snow fall with a deep sense of melancholy.
Max had become more than just a dog waiting for his owner. He had become a symbol for the town itself, a reminder that hope, while powerful, could also be a burden. And yet, despite the growing doubts, the townspeople continued to care for Max, bringing him food, blankets, and their unwavering support.
As the first true storm of winter approached, the town braced itself.
The winds grew stronger, and the snow began to fall in earnest. Lily, Tom, and the other townspeople exchanged worried glances as they prepared for the cold nights ahead.
But through it all, Max remained at the station, unshaken by the weather, his loyalty an anchor in the midst of uncertainty. For the people of the town, Max's vigil was no longer just about Henry. It had become a test of faith, a question of how long hope could survive in the face of time and hardship. The winter storm hit the town with a fury that few had anticipated. The winds howled through the narrow streets, carrying with them a biting chill that seemed to seep into every corner of the town. Snow fell thick and fast, blanketing the town in a layer of white that dulled the sounds of everyday life. The people of the town retreated into their homes, fires crackling in their hearts as they braced for the long, cold night ahead. But while the town grew quiet, one figure remained steadfast at the station, refusing to leave his post despite the storm.
Max lay curled up on the platform, his fur dusted with snow, his eyes half closed against the wind, but still watchful. His body shivered occasionally, but he did not move from his spot.
The storm might have brought the town to a standstill, but it could not shake Max's resolve. From the window of her bakery, Lily watched the scene with growing concern. The storm had intensified, and she could barely make out Max's form through the swirling snow.
Her heart ached at the sight.
For weeks, she had cared for Max, bringing him food and blankets, offering him her quiet companionship.
She had watched his health decline as the cold set in, his once vibrant coat now dull and matted.
And yet, despite everything, Max had never wavered in his loyalty. Unable to bear the thought of Max enduring the storm alone any longer, Lily made a decision. She grabbed her coat and wrapped herself in layers of scarves and gloves, preparing to venture out into the snow.
"I can't leave him out there," she muttered to herself as she pulled on her boots.
The wind rattled the windows of the bakery, but Lily's determination was stronger than her fear of the storm. Pushing open the door to the bakery, Lily stepped out into the freezing night. The wind hit her with full force, nearly knocking her off balance, but she pressed on, making her way toward the station. Each step was a struggle as the snow gathered around her legs, but her thoughts were focused on Max. She couldn't let him suffer any longer. When Lily finally reached the platform, she found Max exactly where she had left him, curled up against the cold, his fur nearly blending into the snow around him. "Max," she called out softly, her voice barely audible over the wind. The dog's ears twitched, and his eyes opened slowly, meeting hers with a weary gaze. Lily knelt beside him, placing a gentle hand on his head. "You can't stay out here," she said, her voice cracking with emotion.
"Come with me, Max. It's too cold." But Max didn't move.
His eyes flicked toward the tracks, as if waiting for the train that would bring Henry home.
Lily felt a pang of sorrow at the sight. "Please, Max," she pleaded, her hand gripping his fur. "You don't have to do this. Let me take care of you." Max gave a soft whine, but his body remained where it was, unmoved by the storm, unmoved by Lily's pleas. His loyalty to Henry was stronger than the storm, stronger than the cold. Lily could feel tears welling up in her eyes, but she quickly brushed them away.
"I know you're waiting for him," she whispered, "but what if he's not coming back?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken fears.
Lily had never voiced her doubts about Henry's return before, not even to herself.
But now, faced with the harsh reality of the storm and Max's unyielding faith, she couldn't hold them back any longer. "What if?" she began, but the words caught in her throat. For a long moment, they sat there together in the snow, the storm swirling around them.
Lily knew that she couldn't force Max to leave. His heart was set on waiting, no matter the cost.
And so, with a heavy sigh, she stood up, brushing the snow from her coat. "I'll come back in the morning," she promised, her voice trembling. "I'll bring more blankets. Just, please be okay."
Lily turned and walked back toward the bakery, her heart heavy with worry. As she glanced back over her shoulder, she could see Max still lying on the platform, his body barely visible through the falling snow.
The sight filled her with a deep sense of helplessness.
She had done everything she could, but Max's loyalty was something beyond her control.
Back at her bakery, Lily sat by the window, watching the storm rage on. She thought about Max alone at the station and wondered how much longer he could keep waiting.
She had seen the toll the months had taken on him, the way his steps had grown slower, his body thinner.
And now, with the storm bearing down on the town, she feared that Max's faith might cost him his life. Tom, too, was worried. From his home near the square, he watched the snow pile up outside his window.
He had lived through many winters in the town, but something about this one felt different.
Perhaps it was the way Max had become a symbol for the town, a reflection of their own hopes and fears.
Or perhaps it was the way the storm seemed to mirror the uncertainty that had gripped the town since Henry's departure.
As Tom sat by the fire, his thoughts drifted to Henry.
He had always been a good man, full of life and ambition. But Tom knew better than most that life didn't always turn out the way you expected.
"Sometimes the ones we wait for don't come back," he muttered to himself, echoing the words he had once spoken to Max. It was a truth that Tom had learned the hard way, and he feared that Max was about to learn the same lesson. The storm continued through the night, howling against the walls of the town. By morning, the streets were buried under a thick layer of snow, and the cold had seeped into every corner of the town.
Lily woke early, her first thought of Max. She bundled herself up once again and headed out into the snow, her heart pounding with fear.
She prayed that Max had made it through the night.
When she reached the station, her breath caught in her throat. Max was still there, lying in his usual spot, covered in a thin layer of snow. For a moment, Lily feared the worst. But then she saw his tail move, just a little, and relief washed over her. "Max," she called softly as she approached, tears of gratitude filling her eyes. "You're still here." She knelt beside him, brushing the snow from his fur. Max lifted his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet strength. He had survived the storm, but Lily could see that it had taken a toll on him. His body was weaker, his movements slower.
And yet, despite everything, he had not given up. The morning after the storm, the town seemed to wake up slowly. The heavy blanket of snow weighed down the rooftops, and the streets were quiet, save for the occasional crunch of footsteps breaking through the frozen crust. Inside her bakery, Lily worked with renewed energy. The storm had left her sleepless, her thoughts circling around Max's condition. She had been unable to stop worrying about him, despite seeing him survive the worst of the night. Now, as the sun rose and the storm settled, her mind was busy with the possibility that something needed to change. She couldn't bear watching him suffer any longer, even if his loyalty was stronger than the storms of nature.
Later that morning, Lily made her way to the station with fresh blankets and warm broth.
As she approached, the familiar sight of Max, still curled up in his usual spot, met her eyes.
She felt both relief and sadness. His survival had filled her with hope, but she knew that each day was a struggle for him now.
She set the bowl of broth down beside him, kneeling to smooth the blankets over his weathered body.
"I brought you something warm," she said softly, though Max's tired eyes barely registered her presence.
As Lily sat with Max, watching him sip at the broth, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed across the station platform. Tom appeared, bundled up in his old coat, his breath visible in the crisp morning air.
"Lily,"
he called out, waving a small envelope in his hand.
His voice carried an urgency that startled her.
"There's a letter."
"It's addressed to Henry's family." Lily stood up quickly, her heart pounding in her chest.
"A letter?
"From where?" "Overseas," Tom said, breathless as he reached her. "It might be from him, Lily. It might be from Henry."
For a moment, hope flooding Lily's chest, bright and warm like the sun breaking through clouds. She glanced down at Max, who had lifted his head slightly, his tired eyes watching the exchange with faint interest.
Could this be it? Could this be the sign they had all been waiting for?
"Come on," Tom urged. "We need to open it." Lily hesitated for only a second before she nodded, her heart hammering with anticipation. "Let's go," she said, and together they made their way to the town square, where the townspeople had already begun to gather. Word of the letter had spread quickly, and there was a buzz of excitement in the air. The possibility of news from Henry had lifted the spirits of everyone, even those who had quietly doubted his return.
As they reached the square, Lily saw the station master standing by the old fountain, holding the letter delicately, as if it might hold the key to a mystery long unsolved. The townspeople had gathered in a loose circle around him, their faces filled with curiosity and hope. Tom approached the station master, and together, they carefully opened the envelope. The crowd held its breath as the letter was pulled free, and the station master cleared his throat before beginning to read aloud.
The letter was written in formal handwriting, its tone official.
It explained that Henry had indeed been in a foreign country and that he had faced significant hardship.
The letter did not go into great detail, but mentioned that Henry had been detained for reasons beyond his control. There had been legal troubles, a misunderstanding that had kept him far from home for far longer than anyone had expected. The letter continued, stating that Henry had not forgotten his life back home, nor had he forgotten about Max. It seemed that during the time of his detention, Henry had written several letters, though many had been lost or delayed.
The one they held now was the first to arrive after all this time.
The station master's voice wavered as he reached the end of the letter, where it stated that Henry had been released. However, due to injuries and the time that had passed, Henry had needed to recover in a foreign hospital, unable to return as quickly as he had hoped.
But the letter ended with a promise Henry would return soon. A murmur spread through the crowd, a mixture of relief and uncertainty.
The letter brought hope, but it also raised more questions.
When would Henry return? What had happened to him during all those years away? Lily stood frozen, her mind racing.
It was the news they had all waited for, but it didn't feel complete. She glanced at Tom, whose face was edged with both hope and doubt. The station master folded the letter carefully, holding it close as if it were something precious.
"He's coming back," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else.
"Henry's coming back." As the townspeople began to disperse, discussing the letter and what it might mean, Lily found herself walking back toward the station, her thoughts swirling. She had spent so long caring for Max, watching over him as he waited for the man who had disappeared. And now, with Henry's return on the horizon, she didn't know what to feel. There was hope, yes, but there was also fear. Would Max make it long enough to see Henry again?
When Lily reached the platform, she found Max sitting up, his tail wagging weakly as if he sensed something had changed. She knelt beside him, her hand gently stroking his fur.
"You've been waiting so long," she whispered.
"He's coming back, Max."
"He's really coming back."
Max gave a soft whine, resting his head in her lap.
He didn't have the strength of his younger days, but Lily could see the spark of life in his eyes, a glimmer of the dog he had once been. She smiled through her tears, her heart aching with both joy and sorrow. "Just a little longer," she said, her voice breaking. "He'll be here soon." As the days passed, the town burst with the news of Henry's impending return. People stopped by the station more often, offering words of encouragement to Max, who had become something of a local hero. The town's mood shifted from uncertainty to anticipation, and Max's story spread even further, touching the hearts of those who heard it. But through it all, Max remained focused on the tracks, his body growing weaker, but his spirit unbroken.
Lily stayed by his side, bringing him food and warmth, her own heart caught between hope and fear.
The letter had given them all something to hold on to, but time was slipping away, and Max's strength was fading.
One evening, as the sun set over the snow-covered hills, Lily sat with Max on the platform, her hand resting on his head as they watched the horizon together.
The air was cold, but the warmth of hope lingered in the town. Max had waited for so long, and now, the promise of Henry's return was within reach.
But as Lily sat with him, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time.
Steadfast ADJ.
Firm and unwavering.
Explanation: being resolute, committed, or loyal to something without changing. Example: Max remained steadfast, waiting at the station for Henry every day. Somber ADJ. Dark, gloomy, or solemn. Explanation: often used to describe a mood or setting that is serious or sad. Example:
Henry's somber expression hinted at the difficult goodbye ahead. Vigil noun, a period of keeping watch or waiting, especially during a time of hardship.
Explanation refers to staying alert and watchful, especially during a challenging or emotional time. Example: Max's daily vigil at the station became a symbol of loyalty.
Dwindle, verb to diminish gradually in size, amount, or strength.
Explanation describes something slowly decreasing over time. Example: as the months passed, Max's energy began to dwindle, but his hope never faded. Crisp, adj, cool and refreshing, often used to describe the weather. Explanation refers to a day that feels fresh, clear, and slightly cold. Example: the crisp autumn air greeted Max as he waited once again for Henry. Unyielding, adj,
Not giving way to pressure.
resolute and determined. Explanation describes someone or something that does not give in easily. Example: Max's unyielding loyalty inspired the entire town. Nor verb to bite at or nibble something persistently.
Can also refer to something causing persistent worry or stress.
Explanation can refer to both physical action biting or emotional tension. Example: a sense of doubt began to gnaw at Lily's mind as more time passed.
Hesitate, verb to pause or be uncertain before doing something.
Explanation: a moment of uncertainty or delay before taking action. Example: Lily hesitated before approaching Max, worried about his well-being. Wow, what a touching story we just experienced together.
Our loyal friend Max waited patiently, day after day, for his beloved owner to return. Did you enjoy it? Was this story easy for you to follow?
I hope the English was clear and understandable.
I'd love to know if you liked the story and if it helped improve your understanding.
Remember, practice makes perfect.
So, why not watch another story to keep learning? One will appear right here at the end of the video. Just click and continue your journey with us.
Together, we'll get better at English with each story we share. Thank you for being here, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.